The recently knighted Sir Michael Fabricant joins us now. And Sir Michael, you have always been a strong ally of Boris Johnson. You didn't want him to go as Prime Minister 2 years ago. What do you make of the calls now to bring him back, if not as a political figure in Cabinet, perhaps at the very least as a campaign cheerleader?
Well, I think Boris is always a good campaign cheerleader. I'll tell you what, it's not just Boris. What about bringing back, or not bringing back, actually bringing in Nigel Farage? But there's lots of people we're talking about, but it's all speculation. And it all depends, of course, on whether they want to do it as well.
Interesting you bring up the name Nigel Farage, Michael.
Yes, well, he's someone that a lot of people think would be a very useful person to back the Conservative Party. After all, he was originally a Conservative Party member. But I do understand that there's also concern that we want someone who accepts, shall we say, cabinet responsibility, even if he isn't in the cabinet. So it needs to be someone who's going to be reliable. Maybe some Conservatives think that Nigel wouldn't be that reliable. Maybe some Conservatives wouldn't want Nigel Farage or Boris.
Michael, does Rishi Sunak listen enough to his backbenchers? Has he got his finger on the pulse of what the average Conservative MP wants?
Yeah, I think he does. He talks a lot to backbenchers and has frequent meetings with them. He certainly reacts well to when people make suggestions, and he even takes up some of the suggestions occasionally. So that's better than some prime ministers I have known.
It's interesting, this event tonight, Michael, that the Prime Minister will, to some extent, be appearing on as the first live event of the general election campaign. It's going to be a representative audience of people from many different political backgrounds, and we don't know the questions. It could be a fairly testing time for him.
Yeah, it could indeed. I think it's actually a huge compliment to GBNews that the whole launch, if you like, of his campaign is being done on that channel. And it shows that not only does GBNews take a general view and a very sort of unbiased view about things, it's pulling in the audience to make actually it worthwhile for the Prime Minister to appear on it. Will it be testing? Well, you know, one thing about Rishi Sunak is he's a very, very quick thinker. And because he's a quick thinker, I think he'll be able to react well. And it'll also give viewers the opportunity to see the real Rishi Sunak.
Well, judging by the polls at the moment, it might be quite testing for the Prime Minister. Now, you brought up Nigel Farage at the start of this interview, so I want to put to you that Nigel Farage believes the diversity agenda is damaging the army. Do you agree? I
agree. And more importantly, Grant Shapps agrees, the Secretary of State for Defence. He's actually said that the whole thing is extremist behaviour, and he's determined to stamp it out. It was a report written in by the Army, or by the Armed Forces, which I believe wasn't actually agreed. Well, it certainly wasn't agreed by the Secretary of State. Look, we're facing very, very testing times. We don't know what's happening with NATO. The candidate Trump, President Trump, we call him president because he was a former president, is saying that he doesn't even believe necessarily that he would back NATO if Russia were to attack NATO. Look, we need to have an army, navy, air force and Royal Marines that work. And that's like in most things in life, down to having a meritocracy and not actually allowing people to come.
That sounds all great, and that will be music to the ears of many people who are concerned about the Army's recruitment policies, but this all seems to have happened under the Conservatives' watch. Is this an issue of outsourcing?
Well, it's not outsourcing. What it is because you've always got people in you know, parts of organisations, large organisations like the Armed Forces, you know, who are supposed to be thinking outside the box, and they've certainly thought outside the box this time. But we've got an interesting problem, of course, with the Armed Forces, and that is with recruitment. And it's partly a reflection of the fact that unemployment is so low in the United Kingdom. Whenever we get high unemployment and a weak economy, that's when people join the Armed Forces. Because the economy is doing well relative to other European countries, in the United Kingdom. That's causing a problem at the moment with recruitment.
Well, so far the economy has dodged recession. We can't say that it's really going gangbusters, more of a sort of gradually inclining, almost flat line. Although we do get new numbers later this week, we might see the UK economy going into recession later this week, although we might not. Of course, Germany's already there. But, Michael, you say you want an armed forces that work. I suppose this isn't just about the people who work in them, it's also about the equipment. We learn now that the HMS Prince of Wales, one of our two flagship aircraft carriers, was meant to join a NATO exercise and hasn't been able to leave harbour.
I know, it's terrible. And in fact, the other aircraft carriers that we have, both brand new, of course. To have two aircraft battle groups does still make the Royal Navy probably the second largest blue sea navy, ocean-going navy in the world. But it is pretty humiliating when you buy a brand new device and then you find that it doesn't work properly. And of course, the prop shaft difficulties were also in the other aircraft carrier too, though I gather this one is slightly different, the actual cause of the prop shaft difficulty. Somebody will be hanging their heads in shame.
What did they say about procurement? Because we've heard so much that MOD procurement is in the doldrums. You get different contracts escalating in price, not delivering equipment that works. This surely needs an overhaul.
Well, people have been saying that since the Second World War, and it certainly does need a more effective way, I think, of procuring. But, you know, whenever you buy something which is incredibly specialist, like an aircraft carrier, and no one aircraft carrier is like another, though, of course, the two aircraft carrier that we bought are more or less identical, it does mean that you are going to have difficulties when the thing gets on air, as I always say. You know, I used to design radio and television stations, and each one was different. And thankfully, we didn't have too many problems getting them on air on time. But some would say an aircraft carrier is even more complicated.
Well, let's hope it can get fixed soon, and indeed the entire structure of the armed forces.
Yes, Michael, you sound a little bit awfully relaxed about this whole thing. I'm rather more worried, perhaps, than what this means about the state of our armed forces. But there you go. Thank you very much for your time. Always appreciate it. Love to speak to you. Conservative MP for Lichfield, Sir Michael Fabricant there.